him and Jim went and cased them for a building. There's a lot of federal offices in that building, so it seemed like a good target of various agencies being in that building. So we had our munitions guys start to develop a rocket launcher, and all the rockets would be shot at the same time towards the murder. All the missiles exploded in the guy's hand that was building them, scarred his hands real bad. So we took that as a sign that from God that we weren't supposed to do that particular plan.
I was surprised as to the extent of violence of this group, believing that they were going to cause the collapse of the United States of America, and that they were going to help create that collapse. We actually learned that Richard Wayne Snell, a member of the CSA, shot and killed a pawn shop owner in Texarkana, believing he was Jewish, had killed Lewis Bryant, a state police trooper, murdered, I believe that was in '84.
Got out of a van, and I shot Officer Bryan twice from the hip.
The death of Trooper Lewis Bryant was especially heartbreaking for Bill Clinton. While the governor was visibly shaken over the slaying, he was also angry.
You know, they don't have a right to go around carrying weapons and taking the law in their hands and acting as if they're somehow playing God.
Snell got the death penalty. Snell's execution was to be on the night of April 19th, 1995, which happened to be the day the Oklahoma City federal building got bombed.
What? Don't want it? What? What?
In the movement, April 19th, of course, is what's called Patriots Day. First shot fired during the American Revolution. Very special for the whole movement. Jim told me one time, he said, I will go down in history in the Second American Revolution. In '84, told Jim, I said, so you really want all this to start? He said, yes. I said, so build a bomb and we'll start the war. So we decided to go to find a good place to do the bombing. We found the gay church. We sort of had this stereotype image in our heads that there was just going to be this sexual orgy going on, which of course there wasn't. I started seeing people lift their hands up, lift their eyes up, look up and start worshiping God. And I identified with them. So instantly they ceased being homosexuals in my eyes and became Christians. And I couldn't kill Christians. Later, I'm trying to talk to God. And I said, Lord, I want to leave. You know, I can't handle this no more. And the Lord spoke to me and said, you can't leave.
It looks like a battle zone. Police and federal agents blockading the roads, surrounding the heavily armed compound of a white supremacist sect calling itself the Covenant, the Sword, and the Arm of the Lord. They want to arrest the leader, James Ellison, on an illegal weapons charge.
Covenant, Sword, the Arm of the Lord. They lived in log cabins. Every log cabin had a trap door. When you dropped through the trap door, you were in a foxhole with your weapon and ammunition ready. Federal officials, they really wanted to storm this compound, just like what later happened in Waco.
We knew that a frontal assault attack on that entity, a lot of people had died, and we didn't want that. I did not want that. My job is not to kill people. I don't have to do it, but I don't want to do it. And I didn't want to get in a shootout in the Ozarks. They had murder on their mind, and they were all doing it for God. I found somebody I could talk to. Actually, he came to me, Kerry Noble.
He said, I want to make this plain. We are not going to shoot first. We don't want to kill anybody here. But if y'all shoot first, I got a Huey helicopter. It's going to come up. It's got a 50 caliber machine gun. It's going to start shooting holes in all your buildings. In 30 seconds, every man, woman, and child in your compound is going to be dead. So for 4 days, I went back and forth talking to Jim, talking to Danny. Finally, on the 4th day, Jim got that revelation that he could justify in his mind a higher purpose in surrendering. We get down there, and then Danny looks at Jim and says, I'm placing you under arrest, but I'm not going to handcuff you right now because I would not want to be handcuffed in front of my men. And I'm just bawling.
The 4-day siege ended as quietly as it began. The FBI got more than it bargained for. Other weapons found at the camp read like an arsenal checklist. Hand grenade casings, blasting caps, dynamite, and various handguns.
We found cyanide in huge barrels. They're going to poison water supplies.
In addition to the arrest of CSA leader James Ellison by federal and state authorities.
Jim ended up taking a plea bargain on the weapons charges. Well, I got arrested, ended up plea bargaining, 5-year sentence. My dream for moving there had turned into a nightmare. But the movement continued to grow.
The White Power movement had come together every summer at the Aryan Nations World Congress in Hayden Lake, Idaho. In 1983, the movement adopted a number of key strategies, and it decided to declare war on the federal government.
There is nothing more that the white Aryan can do but obey the commandment of Yahweh his God and separate himself.
They thought mainstream politics could never ever deliver the kinds of social changes they wanted. In the 80s, there is a major campaign of violence and crime carried out by this movement across the United States. Robbing armored cars, bombings of gay theaters, assassinations.
Last night, Alec Berg was killed in ambush, arriving at his Denver home. 10.45 caliber shell casings.
It's a spree. By 1987, the government believes it has a case that all of this activity represents an organized criminal conspiracy to overthrow the United States government.
Charges of sedition were filed against Reverend Butler and others.
In its opening statement, the government said it intends to prove that 10 of the defendants plotted to overthrow the government by force.
Seditious conspiracy is a hard charge to prove. Prosecutors have to show that they intended to overthrow the U.S. government and had the capacity to do so.
What the FBI now sees across the country is a national network of neo-Nazis and white supremacist groups whose goal is to purge this country of blacks, Jews, and other minorities.
One, I want to praise Yahweh's holy and precious name. Two, I want to say to hell with the federal government.
Louis Beam is really the intellectual architect of leaderless resistance. And I think this has been the biggest legacy of the White Power movement and the reason it's been with us since 1983. Activists can work violently in common cause without direct communication with leaders. There are still leaders in leaderless resistance, but they're not culpable because you can't trace them to the individual violent actions.
I understood that that was their intent, but I also knew that an Arkansas jury would have a hard time convicting these folks of attempted overthrow of the United States government when they had no capacity really to do that.
No, very cheeky.
That's why they called it a conspiracy. The thought was trying to overthrow the government. Actually, they couldn't do it, but they certainly tried.
The government had really bet the farm on this trial. They had used all of these other busts to kind of amass state's witnesses, and it fails spectacularly.
It was the first serious setback in the federal government's war against suspected white supremacist groups. 13 defendants were found not guilty of all charges, which included murder, robbery, and conspiracy to overthrow the government.
It was a tremendous defeat for the government, and it totally enabled the far-right movement. We're free to go do whatever we want to do. They tried, they missed, we have got them by the short hairs.
Sheila being passed out and had to be carried off by her husband, who now walks free.
Leaderless resistance was Louis Beam's idea, and he passed it along to everybody else in the movement. The best way to go after the government was not to have this organized CSA compound, but to have individuals, which led, of course, to the term lone wolves.
Iraqi troops have crossed the border into Kuwait.
As was the case in the 1930s, we see in Saddam Hussein an aggressive dictator threatening his neighbors.
In our history of extremist movements in the United States, the most consistent correlation with spikes in membership is the aftermath of combat. Louis Beam understood this veteran connection very, very well. He did this very specifically, going to military bases, recruiting active duty troops, recruiting veterans. These groups move from, the white robe and hood to camouflage fatigues, able to take in a new generation of veterans coming home. Most notably, Timothy McVeigh.
Tim McVeigh came from a family that was literally the salt of the earth. They had come over in the 19th century to help with the canal and earned enough money to buy some farmland. You had the dawn of the automobile and Harrison Radiator, the sprawling plant where as many as 8,000 people worked at one time, and that was the world that Bill McVeigh was offering to his son.
All 4 houses we lived in, we always had a pretty good sized garden. We had a pool here. Sometimes in the summer when I'd come home from work and there'd be 15 kids in the pool. Family right next door to McDermott's, they had a daughter the same age as Jennifer, Molly. They were good everyday neighbors.
He would play with us, he would babysit us, he took us trick-or-treating, and so I've known his family forever. I'm sure that the divorce of his parents was hard. When the split occurred, he chose to stay with his dad.
There was nobody that McVeigh loved or admired more than his grandfather, Ed McVeigh. He taught Tim McVeigh all about proper handling of guns, how to use guns. I think he equated guns with his beloved grandfather.
Tim McVeigh's father worked at a GM plant for 30 years. Tim McVeigh's grandfather worked in the same plant for 30 years. By the time McVeigh came along, that plant was shrinking almost to non-existence. The industrial decline of the Buffalo area was a formative influence on McVeigh. At the same time, Terry Nichols was growing up on a small, struggling farm in the thumb of Michigan. And the farm crisis was making it harder and harder for farmers like him to survive. So McVeigh and Nichols represent the crisis in American agriculture and the crisis in American industry to an almost perfect degree.
I don't know when the idea to go into the military really came, but the first time I even sensed Tim seeming different was after his time over during the Gulf War.
The bombing in Iraq began 24 hours ago. It is still going on.
Benning, Terry Nichols became one of McVeigh's best friends. He was very influential on McVeigh's views of politics. McVeigh became close to Michael Fortier, who would smoke dope when he was out on patrol. One of the very first experiences McVeigh had after joining the Army was these drill sergeants. They would scream things like, "Kill, kill, kill." McVeigh became a very skilled sharpshooter in a Bradley military vehicle.
In one instance, he spotted 2 Iraqi soldiers, brought them into his sights. He said all he saw was a red mist. He's proud of his kill. He got a Bronze Star for it. But as this very short war progressed, he saw the carnage from all of the bombs that had been dropped. It was overkill to him.
This set of men is trying to talk the Iraqis into surrendering. There's a group of men, Iraqis on the right carrying white flags. Over there, a large number of Iraqi tanks.
I've been in a lot of wars. And wars and combat affect different people different ways. I think what goes on in a lot of people who leave war is that they had a purpose. And the purpose in Desert Storm was to take back Kuwait and defeat Saddam Hussein's army. And that was a huge purpose, a huge global purpose. Then you come back home and you might have trouble finding a job and you start getting discouraged.
Tim McVeigh and myself, we both have that title, veteran. We spend 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 years of our life serving our nation. Then when you get out of the military, you come back to the United States, and everyone's telling you that
You want a squash?
you're wrong, and you shouldn't be killing
You want
people, you
squash?
shouldn't be at war.
My daughter Julie demonstrated with a lot of other students against the Gulf War, and the results of that war is actually the very thing that ended up causing her death.
How do you mean?
Well, because Tim McVeigh served in the Gulf War, had PTSD.
Yeah.
Those soldiers saw Iraqis get shot in the back and saw tanks that actually buried some Iraqi soldiers alive. They saw all that angry stuff and came back angry young men.
After the war, McVeigh went to this Green Beret tryout. He failed in his tryout to become a Green Beret. That was a demoralizing thing.
Okay.
I think if he had succeeded and been selected as a Green Beret, he probably would have been a great killing machine for the U.S. government.
He comes home and he has a nervous break. He went over to his grandfather's house in February, a few months after he'd been out of the military, in a pair of sweatpants and just socks, no shirt. And Ed McVeigh opens the front door and says, Timmy, what's going on here? He says, I don't know, Grandpa.
McVeigh, having PTSD, I think helps to explain maybe the vulnerability, the fragility of his thinking. He would live in his car, he would sleep in his car, he would listen to right-wing radio, go from gun show to gun show. He was operating as sort of a strong-arm. He was buying guns for people who didn't want any kind of record or even name associated with buying guns. And he knew that these people were part of the insurgency. They're not just selling weapons, they're selling ideology.
I'm William Pierce, and I'll be reading my book, The Turner Diaries, to you. Listen carefully. How it shamed us. All that brave talk of patriots. The government will never take my guns away. And then nothing but meek submission when it happened.
Timothy McVeigh used this book as a Bible